My stepmother slapped me across the face right in front of my grandfather's grave and snatched the leather journal from my hands. She ripped out the pages, screaming that she had finally destroyed my lies. She genuinely thought she had won. She believed that book was the only record of 20 years of neglect, but she had no idea that my grandfather had secretly scanned every single page before he died. My name is Stephanie Delgado, and today I am walking into the Riverview County Courthouse through the main public entrance, bypassing the secure lane I have used every single workday for the past 5 years. The metal detector screams at my belt buckle, forcing me to step back and remove it with a calmness that feels mechanical. The security guard, a man named Ralph who usually jokes with me about the terrible cafeteria coffee, frowns as he waves the wand over my torso. He does not recognize me without my badge clipped to my lapel and my prosecutor's blazer. To him, and to everyone else in this lobby, I am just another civilian caught in the grinding gears of the justice system. I am just another defendant. The irony is thick enough to choke on. Normally, I stride through these halls as a predator of justice, an assistant district attorney for the Harbor City District Attorney's Office. I hunt down domestic abusers, fraudsters, and violent offenders. I build narratives out of evidence and tear down lies with cross-examinations that leave witnesses stammering. But today, the docket does not list me as the representative of the people. It lists me as the respondent, the person accused of manipulating a dying man, the person accused of stealing an inheritance. I push open the heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B. The air inside is stale, smelling of old wood polish, anxiety, and the distinct, metallic scent of overheating photocopiers. And there they are, my opposition. My father, Daniel Delgado, and his wife, my stepmother, Veronica Delgado, are standing near the counsel table. They have curated their appearance with the precision of a magazine editorial team. Daniel is wearing a charcoal suit that is slightly ill-fitting at the shoulders, likely chosen to make him look diminished. A grieving son weighed down by the burden of a rebellious child. He looks weary, a performance he has perfected over 2 decades of ignoring my existence while funding Veronica's lifestyle. But it is Veronica who steals the show. She is wearing a soft, pastel blue cardigan over a modest floral dress. It is the uniform of the martyr. It is the costume of a woman who bakes cookies for the church sale and sacrifices everything for her family. She is clutching a handkerchief, though her eyes are dry. Standing beside them is Blake Harrington, their attorney. I know Blake by reputation. He is a shark in a $3,000 suit, known for aggressive probate litigation and a willingness to bend ethical lines until they are nearly translucent. He looks confident, checking his watch, likely calculating the billable hours he is racking up just by breathing in this room. I walk down the center aisle. My heels click rhythmically against the linoleum floor, a sharp staccato sound that cuts through the low murmur of the gallery. Veronica leans in toward Daniel, but she pitches her voice perfectly so that it carries across the room, intended for the half-dozen curious onlookers and, more importantly, for the court reporter setting up her equipment. "Look, she finally bothered to show up," Veronica whispers, the sound hissing through the quiet room. My poor Daniel, after everything we did for her, such an ungrateful daughter. It is a masterful opening line. It paints the picture immediately. The loving parents, the delinquent child. I do not react. I do not flinch. I do not even look at them. I keep my eyes fixed on the empty defendant's table. I pull out the chair and sit, placing my leather briefcase on the floor. I do not have a lawyer. I do not need one. The side door opens, and the bailiff announces, "All rise." Judge Miriam Sloan sweeps into the room. My stomach tightens, but my face remains a mask of professional boredom. I have tried 6 cases in front of Judge Sloan. She is tough, fair, and suffers absolutely no fools. She values preparation over theatrics. Last month, I watched her dress down a defense attorney for 5 minutes straight because he cited a case that had been overturned. She takes the bench, arranging her robes, and looks down at the docket. Case number 4592, Estate of Edward Wallace, Judge Sloan reads, her voice monotone. Parties. Please state your appearances. Blake Harrington steps forward, radiating the confidence of a man who believes he has already won. Good morning, Your Honor. Blake Harrington, representing the plaintiffs, Daniel and Veronica Delgado. We are here to contest the validity of the final will and testament of the late Edward Wallace and to request an emergency injunction against the respondent to prevent the dissipation of estate assets. Judge Sloan nods and looks toward my table. And for the respondent? I stand up. I button my blazer. I do not smooth my hair or adjust my collar. I stand as I have stood 1,000 times before. Stephanie Delgado, Your Honor, I am representing myself. The court clerk, a woman named Sarah, who I have shared lunch with in the break room on Tuesdays, looks at the file in front of her. She hesitates, glancing up at me, then back at the paper. She clears her throat and speaks into her microphone for the record. The file notes the respondent's occupation as Assistant District Attorney for the Harbor City District Office. Sarah says, "The silence that follows is absolute. It is a vacuum that sucks the oxygen out of the room." I hear a sharp intake of breath from the plaintiff's table. I turn my head, just an inch, to see the reaction. It is delicious. Daniel's jaw has gone slack. He is staring at me as if I have suddenly sprouted wings. He blinks rapidly, his brain trying to reconcile the image of the worthless, rebellious daughter he abandoned with the reality of the woman standing 20 feet away. He did not know. Neither of them knew. They never asked where I worked. They never asked how I paid my bills. To them, I was just a nuisance who occasionally appeared at family gatherings to be ignored. They assumed I was a waitress, or perhaps unemployed, living off the generosity of my grandparents. Veronica looks like she has been slapped. The mask of the grieving, benevolent mother slips for a fraction of a second, revealing the sneer beneath. Her eyes dart from me to the judge, and then to her lawyer. She grabs Blake's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. Blake Harrington is the one who truly understands the gravity of the mistake they have made. He freezes. I can see the gears turning in his head. He is realizing that he is not facing a frightened, uneducated girl who can be bullied into a settlement. He is realizing that his client lied to him. He likely told them I was unstable, emotional, perhaps addicted to drugs. He definitely did not tell them I was a state prosecutor. Judge Sloan stops shuffling her papers. She looks up, her eyebrows rising almost to her hairline. She peers over her reading glasses, her gaze locking onto mine. "Ms. Delgado?" Judge Sloan asks, her tone shifting from bureaucratic detachment to genuine surprise. "I was not aware this was your family matter." "Yes, Your Honor," I reply, my voice steady and cool. "Edward Wallace was my grandfather." Judge Sloan leans back in her chair. She looks at Blake Harrington, and for a brief moment, I see a flicker of pity in her eyes for him. She knows how I operate. She knows I do not come to court unless I have triple-checked every statute and every precedent. "Very well." Judge Sloan says, "Mr. Harrington, you may proceed with your opening motion." Blake clears his throat. He is a professional, so he recovers quickly. But the swagger is gone. He is sweating. He adjusts his tie, his movements slightly jerky. "Your Honor," Blake begins, his voice losing some of its earlier boom. Despite the respondent's professional title, the facts of this case remain clear. We allege that in the final months of Edward Wallace's life, the respondent used her position and proximity to the deceased to exert undue influence. We have reason to believe she isolated Mr. Wallace from his loving daughter-in-law and his only son, poisoning his mind with fabrications to secure the estate for herself. Veronica nods vigorously beside him, trying to salvage the performance. She dabs at her dry eyes again. Blake continues, gaining a bit more momentum. "We have testimony prepared to show that Ms. Delgado has a history of emotional instability. We believe she manipulated a senile old man into rewriting his will, cutting out the family that has cared for him for decades. We are asking the court to freeze all assets immediately to prevent Ms. Delgado from squandering the inheritance on her personal debts. It is a barrage of insults. They are painting me as a predator, a liar, and a thief. They call me unstable. They call me manipulative. They claim I took advantage of a man who was the only father figure I ever truly had. I do not object. I do not jump up and shout liar. I do not cry. I sit perfectly still. I pick up my fountain pen, a gift from Grandpa Edward when I passed the bar exam, and I open my legal pad. I write down every accusation: undue influence, emotional instability, isolation of the deceased. I write them down in neat, cursive script. My face is a blank slate. This is what I do. I let the defense talk. I let them spin their stories and dig their holes. I let them commit to a version of the truth that I can later dismantle, brick by brick. Veronica watches me. I can feel her gaze burning into the side of my head. She is confused by my silence. She expected me to scream. She expected the rebellious teenager she remembers, the one who would slam doors and cry when she was cruel. She wants a reaction. She wants to show the judge that I am the crazy one. But I am not that girl anymore. I am a prosecutor. And silence is not weakness. Silence is gathering ammunition. Blake wraps up his opening salvo. Therefore, Your Honor, we ask that the court invalidate the will dated October 15th and revert to the previous will, which rightfully named Daniel and Veronica Delgado as the executors and primary beneficiaries. Judge Sloan turns to me. Ms. Delgado, do you wish to respond to these initial allegations? I stand slowly. No, Your Honor. Not at this time. I will reserve my arguments for the evidentiary phase. I am content to let the record show the plaintiff's claims as they stand today. Veronica lets out a small, triumphant huff. She thinks I am folding. She thinks I have no defense. She leans over to Daniel and whispers, loud enough for me to hear again. See? She has nothing. She knows she is guilty. I sit back down and finally, for the first time since the hearing began, I turn my head and look directly at Veronica. Our eyes lock. She smirks, a small, cruel twisting of her lips. She touches her handbag, the one where she likely thinks she has secured her victory. She is thinking about the cemetery. She is thinking about the day she slapped me. She is thinking about the leather-bound journal she ripped from my hands, the pages she tore out and burned or shredded, believing she was destroying the only record of her cruelty. She thinks that book was the only copy. She thinks that because Grandpa Edward was 80 years old and pretended to be confused by the television remote, he was technologically illiterate. She thinks that because I wrote with a pen on paper, the words existed only in physical form. I hold her gaze, and I allow the corner of my mouth to lift just a fraction of an inch. It is not a smile of joy. It is the smile of a hunter who has just watched the prey walk willingly into the trap. You can hit me, I think, projecting the thought toward her with all the intensity of a closing argument. You can scream at me in the graveyard. You can tear my journal into confetti and scatter it over the grass. But you have no idea what Grandpa Edward did in his study on those rainy Tuesday afternoons. She does not know about the scanner. She does not know about the cloud server. She does not know about the encrypted USB drives taped behind the drawer of the antique desk she is so eager to sell. She thinks she is fighting a child who writes in a diary. She does not realize she is fighting a prosecutor armed with a meticulously digitized archive of evidence, curated by a retired investigative journalist who saw her coming from a mile away. The judge bangs the gavel, scheduling the next hearing for 3 weeks from today. The noise startles Daniel, but Veronica just smooths her skirt, looking satisfied. She stands up, looping her arm through Daniel's, and turns to leave. As she passes my table, she pauses. Don't worry, Stephanie, she says, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. We'll make sure you get some help for your problems. Once we get the money back. I say nothing. I just cap my pen with a sharp, decisive click. The sound echoes like a gunshot in the quiet room. I watch them walk out. The doors swing shut behind them. I am alone at the defense table, but I do not feel lonely. I feel the weight of the ghost beside me. I feel Grandpa Edward's hand on my shoulder. Let them talk. Steffi. I hear his voice in my head, clear as a bell. Let them put it all on the record. Then we hang them with it. I gather my files. The game has changed. They wanted a war? They just declared one on the wrong Delgado. And unlike them, I have the receipts, every single. 1. I did not grow up in a house of screams or broken bones. People often assume that when you end up in court fighting your own father, there must have been some horrific incident involving belts or bruises. But my scars were different. They were quiet. They were the scars of silence, of empty rooms, and of being an accessory to a life my father wanted to build with someone else. I was 18 years old when Daniel brought Veronica home. Most stepmother stories begin when the child is young and helpless, a 6-year-old clutching a teddy bear while a wicked woman throws away her toys. That was not us. I was legally an adult, standing on the precipice of college, packing boxes in my room. I remember the night clearly. Daniel had called a family meeting, a term that usually meant he was going to announce a decision he had already made without consulting me. We sat at the mahogany dining table that was always polished but rarely used for actual meals. Daniel cleared his throat, adjusting his tie even though he had been home from the office for 3 hours. "I want you to meet Veronica," he said, gesturing to the woman sitting beside him. She was beautiful. I will give her that. She had hair the color of spun gold, and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. "Veronica is going to bring some stability to this family," Daniel announced. I remember staring at him, confused. Stability? I was leaving for the university in 2 months. I had spent the last 10 years raising myself while he climbed the corporate ladder. I made my own lunches. I signed my own permission slips with a forgery skill that would later help me spot fake checks in the district attorney's office. I did not need a mother. I certainly did not need stability from a woman who looked at me like I was a stain on the upholstery. But Daniel was infatuated. He was rewriting his life, and in this new draft, he needed a glamorous wife to hang on his arm at charity galas. I was just a lingering plot point from a previous chapter he wanted to close. The truth is, I already had a family. They just did not live in that cold, echoey house. My real family lived 4 miles away in a small, clutter-filled bungalow that smelled perpetually of old paper, pipe tobacco, and roasting garlic. They were Edward and Helen Wallace, my grandparents. My mother, their daughter, had left when I was 3 years old. She simply decided that motherhood did not suit her temperament and vanished to search for herself in Europe, never to return. Daniel, overwhelmed and ambitious, had essentially outsourced my upbringing to his in-laws. Edward Wallace was a retired investigative journalist. He had spent 40 years chasing corruption, exposing crooked city council members, and digging through dumpsters for shredded documents. He saw the world not as a collection of people, but as a series of stories, some true and some fabricated. When Veronica moved in, the dynamic in my father's house shifted from indifferent to hostile. Veronica loved the idea of being a stepmother, but only when there was an audience. If Daniel was in the room, she would fuss over me. She would ask if I had eaten, or if I needed money for clothes. But the moment the front door closed behind my father, the warmth evaporated. I remember one Tuesday night specifically. It was raining. A cold, miserable downpour that rattled the windows. Daniel was away on a business trip in Chicago. I came downstairs at 7 in the evening, hungry. Veronica was in the kitchen, eating a salad out of a plastic container. She did not look up. "There is nothing in the fridge," she said, her voice flat. I threw out the leftovers. They were taking up space. I opened the refrigerator. It was spotless and empty, save for a bottle of white wine and a jar of olives. My stomach growled. "You could order a pizza," she suggested, finally looking at me. "But do not use the emergency cash in the drawer. Your father says we are spending too much this month." I had $5 in my pocket. I turned around, walked back upstairs, and dialed the only number that mattered. "Grandma?" I whispered into the phone. "Steffi?" Her voice was warm, instantly wrapping around me. "What is wrong?" "Nothing," I lied. "I was just wondering, what are you and Grandpa eating tonight?" There was a pause. I could hear the clatter of a pot lid in the background. "We are having beef stew," she said, "and Grandpa bought that crusty bread you like. How fast can you get here?" I drove to their house in the rain, crying the entire way. When I walked into their kitchen, dry and warm and smelling of thyme and beef, Grandpa Edward was sitting at the kitchen table with a red pen and a newspaper, circling typos. He looked up, his sharp blue eyes assessing my red face and wet hair in a single glance. He did not ask what Veronica had said. He did not ask why I was there. He just pointed to the chair opposite him. "Sit," he commanded gently. "Eat. Then, we write." That was the night the journaling began in earnest. Grandpa pushed a black, leather-bound notebook across the table. It was heavy, the paper thick and cream-colored. "Write it down," Edward said. "Write what down?" I asked, tearing off a piece of bread. "Everything," he said. "The empty fridge, the comment about the money, the way she looks at you when your father is not watching." "Why?" I asked. "It sounds petty." "It is not petty," he said, his voice dropping to that serious register he used when talking about his old cases. "It is the record. Steffi, listen to me. People like Veronica, and people like your father. They survive by rewriting history. They rely on the fact that you will forget, or that you will doubt your own memory. They will say they tried their best. They will say you were difficult. They will say they treated you like a princess and you were ungrateful." He tapped the cover of the notebook with his index finger. "But ink does not forget. You write the truth now, while it is fresh. You build the timeline. Because one day, someone is going to try to twist your life into a shape that suits them, and you are going to need this to remind yourself of who you actually are." So I wrote about the graduation dinner where Veronica accidentally forgot to make a reservation for the restaurant I wanted, so we ended up eating at a place she liked instead. I wrote about the time Daniel promised to drive me to college orientation, but canceled 10 minutes before because Veronica had a migraine, leaving me to take a 3-hour bus ride alone. Grandma Helen was the soft counterbalance to Grandpa's hard lessons on evidence. She was the one who made the neglect bearable. When I graduated from high school, Daniel did not buy me a dress. He gave me a generic card with $100 inside. It was Grandma Helen who took me to the fabric store, bought 3 yards of deep blue silk, and spent 2 weeks sewing a dress that fit me perfectly. She was there for everything. When I played soccer, I would look at the sidelines. The other kids had parents cheering. I had an empty space where my father should have been. But then I would look further down the line, near the corner flag, and there they would be. Helen in her oversized sun hat, holding a thermos of lemonade, and Edward with his camera. That camera was a weapon, though I did not know it then. Grandma Helen had a habit that used to annoy me but later saved my sanity. She took photos of everything, but she did not just take photos of the happy moments. She took photos of the reality. There is a photo in my journal from my 19th birthday. I am sitting at the kitchen table in my grandparents' house, blowing out candles on a chocolate cake. Next to the cake is my phone, lit up with a text message. Helen had zoomed in on the phone screen before taking the picture. The text was from Daniel. "Meeting running late. Get dinner with your grandparents. Happy B-Day." I pasted that photo into the journal. Underneath it, I wrote, 19 years old. Dad is at a meeting. Veronica posted a photo of them at a wine tasting an hour later. Caption, "Date night with my love." Grandpa Edward taught me how to cross-reference. He taught me to check the timestamps. Print that Facebook post, he told me the next day when I showed him. Print it out and tape it right next to the picture of your text message. "Why, Grandpa?" I asked. "It just makes me sad." "Because," he said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder, "evidence is not about feelings. It is about facts. The fact is, he lied. The fact is, he chose her over you. Again, do not let them tell you later that he was working hard for your future. He was drinking Pinot Noir in Santa Barbara." As the years went on, the dynamic grew uglier. Veronica realized that Edward and Helen were not just my guardians, they were also wealthy. Edward had invested wisely, and he had a significant pension. Suddenly, Veronica started coming to Sunday dinners. The atmosphere at those dinners was suffocating. Veronica would sweep in, wearing jewelry that cost more than my tuition, and kiss Grandma Helen on the cheek, leaving a smear of pink lipstick. She would call them Mom and Dad, which made my skin crawl. She would spend the first hour charming them, telling exaggerated stories about Daniel's success. Then, over dessert, the tone would shift. "We are thinking of redoing the kitchen," Veronica would say, casually stirring her coffee, "but cash is a little tight right now with the market being so volatile. Daniel is too proud to ask, but I told him family supports family." I would watch Grandpa Edward. He never got angry. He never yelled. He would just sit there, peeling an orange with a small pocket knife, his face completely unreadable. "How much?" Edward would ask. "Oh, just a bridge loan," Veronica would say, smiling that shark smile. "Maybe $20,000? We would pay you back in 6 months." Edward would nod slowly. He would take out his checkbook, but before he wrote anything, he would open his own notebook, a smaller version of the one he gave me. "Loan for kitchen renovation," he would say aloud as he wrote. "Request made by Veronica. Date, November 12th. Terms, repayment in 6 months." Veronica would laugh, a nervous, tittering sound. "Oh, Edward, you are so formal. You do not need to write it down. We are family." I learned about contracts that day. I learned that when someone says we are family while asking for money, you should double-check the lock on your wallet. After they left with the check, Veronica would usually whisper something to me on the way out, a parting shot. "It must be nice," she would hiss, leaning in close so only I could hear, "to just leech off 2 old people because you cannot make it on your own. Maybe you should get a real job instead of hiding in the library studying for those law school exams." I never replied. I would just go back into the house, shaking with rage. Grandpa would be waiting for me in the study. "Did she say something?" he would ask. I would nod. "Write it down," he would say. I filled volume after volume. My journals became a graveyard of their broken promises and a museum of my grandparents' love. I documented the $3,000 they borrowed for a vacation they called a business trip. I documented the time Veronica sold my mother's jewelry, which Daniel had left in a box in the garage, and claimed it had been stolen during a break-in that never happened. I documented the police report number I filed, and the subsequent call from Daniel begging me to drop it so I would not embarrass the family. Grandpa Edward was training me. I did not realize I was in boot camp for my future career as a prosecutor. I thought I was just venting. I thought I was just a sad girl writing in a diary. But he saw the bigger picture. He told me stories about the mayors he took down. "Steffi," he told me once, watching the rain hit the window, "the most dangerous lie is the one wrapped in a tear-stained handkerchief. People love a victim. Veronica plays the victim beautifully. She knows how to cry on cue. She knows how to make you look like the aggressor." He pointed to my journal. "That is your shield," he said, "but a shield is only good if you keep it strong. Be specific. Dates, times, amounts. Did she slap you? Did she scream? What exact words did she use?" "She called me a parasite," I said, looking down at my page. "Good," he said. "Write that, parasite, put it in quotes." One afternoon, shortly before I took the bar exam, Grandma Helen was in the kitchen making chicken soup. I was sitting at the table, stressed out of my mind, surrounded by flashcards. Grandpa came in with a fresh journal. It was number 12. He set it down on top of my constitutional law textbook. "You are almost full on the current one," he observed. I smiled, tired but grateful. "Thanks, Grandpa." He watched me for a moment, his expression uncharacteristically somber. He reached out and tapped the cover of the new book. "Do not forget to sign your name on the first page," he said. "A full signature. Stephanie Marie Delgado." "Why?" I asked. "I know it is mine." He leaned in, his eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and serious intent. "Because," he said, "a diary is just a book of secrets, but a signed, dated, contemporaneous record? That is a sworn statement. You never know. Steffi. Someday, This might be evidence more valuable than anything you say on a witness stand. I laughed. Who am I going to use it against? He did not laugh. He just looked at the door where Veronica had walked out with another check 2 weeks earlier. Just sign the book, he said, and keep writing. I did not know then that he was already sick. I did not know that he had already started his secret project in the study late at night. I just thought he was being my eccentric, paranoid grandpa. But looking back now, I realize he was not paranoid. He was just a reporter who knew that the story was about to take a dark turn, and he wanted to make sure his source was protected. He was preparing me for a war I did not even know was coming. And he was right. About everything. It was a Tuesday night in November, about 3 months after Grandma Helen had passed away. The house felt too big without her. The silence that filled the hallways was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against your eardrums. Outside, a relentless autumn rain was hammering against the roof, the kind of storm that strips the last of the leaves from the trees and leaves the world looking skeletal and gray. I was staying in my old room at my grandfather's house, ostensibly to help him organize some boxes, but mostly because neither of us wanted to be alone. I woke up around 2 a.m. with a dry throat. The air in the house was cold. I pulled my robe tight around myself and stepped out into the hallway, intending to go down to the kitchen for a glass of water. That was when I saw the light. At the end of the hall was the study. For as long as I could remember, that room had been Grandpa Edward's sanctuary. It smelled of pipe tobacco, old newsprint, and dust. Since Grandma died, he had kept the door locked. He told me he was not ready to be in there without her bringing him tea. But tonight, a sliver of yellow light was spilling out from under the doorframe, cutting across the dark floorboards. I walked toward it, my bare feet silent on the wood. I pushed the door open gently. The room was hazy with low light. Grandpa Edward was sitting at his massive oak desk, but he was not reading, he was working. And the equipment on his desk was not the ancient typewriter I associated with him. He had a high-speed document scanner humming rhythmically on the blotter. Beside it was a laptop I did not even know he owned, its screen glowing with a grid of file folders. "Grandpa?" I whispered. He did not jump. He did not try to hide what he was doing. He just looked up over the rim of his reading glasses, his eyes sharp and alert, lacking the grief-stricken fog that had covered them for weeks. "Come in, Stephanie," he said, his voice calm. "Close the door. It is drafty." I stepped inside and looked at what he was doing. My stomach dropped. On the desk, stacked in neat piles, were my journals. There were at least 10 of them, the black leather notebooks I had poured my soul into for the last 4 years, the ones I kept on the bookshelf in my room. He had taken them while I was sleeping. He was feeding them, page by page, into the scanner. The machine whirred, pulled a page through, and spat it out the other side. On the laptop screen, a digital image of my handwriting appeared instantly. "Grandpa, those are private," I said, feeling a flush of violation heat my face. "You are reading them?" "I am not just reading them," he said, unbothered by my tone. "I am archiving them." He picked up the next page, smoothed it out with his calloused thumb, and fed it into the machine. "Why?" I asked, walking closer. "I trusted you. Those are my thoughts. They are about Dad. They are about her." "Exactly," Edward said. He stopped the scanner for a moment and swiveled his chair to face me. "Listen to me, Stephanie. You are writing the history of this family. You are the only one writing the truth. And history, my dear, always has someone who wants to burn it." He gestured to the pile of notebooks. "Paper is fragile," he continued. "Paper can be torn. It can be soaked in water. It can be thrown into a fireplace. If these books are the only proof you have of how you were treated, then you are one matchstick away from being erased." He turned back to the screen and clicked a mouse. "I am scanning every single page at 600 dots per inch," he explained, sounding like a technician. "I am saving them to this external hard drive. But that is not enough. Hard drives fail. Houses burn down. So, I am also uploading them." "Uploading them?" I repeated, stunned. "You do not even use email." You ask me to print out your bank statements because you do not trust the internet." He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "I pretended not to trust it," he corrected. "It is a useful cover. If people think you are senile and behind the times, they speak freely around you. They leave passwords on sticky notes. They do not worry about the old man in the corner." He pointed to a cloud icon on the screen. "I call this the file cabinet in the sky," he said. "It is an encrypted cloud storage service. Servers in Switzerland, or maybe it is Sweden. The point is, Veronica cannot reach it. Daniel cannot reach it. Even if they bulldoze this house, these words exist in the ether." I watched him work. The rhythm was hypnotic. Whir, click, save, whir, click, save. But he did not stop at digital. After he finished scanning a volume, he took the loose pages and reassembled them. Then, he reached under his desk and pulled out a stack of plain white paper. He had printed copies, physical photocopies of my journals. He took a stack of the photocopied pages and placed them into a thin, nondescript manila folder. He stood up and walked over to the wall of bookshelves that lined the room. The shelves were packed with decades of National Geographic magazines, organized in those yellow and black slipcases. He pulled out a slipcase labeled 1974. He slid the manila folder inside, sandwiching it between two magazines about the Serengeti. "No one looks in the 1970s, he muttered. "They are boring years." He did this for 5 different volumes, hiding them in different years, on different shelves. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my anger fading into a strange sense of unease. "Do you think something is going to happen?" Edward sat back down and sighed. He looked old then, the shadows of the lamp deepening the lines on his face. "I spent 40 years as a reporter. Stephanie," he said, "I have seen families destroy each other for a lot less than what your father is worth. I once covered a case where a brother and sister spent $2 million in legal fees fighting over a house worth $500,000. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. When money is involved, and when guilt is involved, people change. Veronica is not just greedy. She is insecure. She knows she is an outsider. She knows you are the threat. If I die, or when I die, she will come for you. She will try to paint you as the problem. She will say you are crazy. She will say you are a liar." He tapped the scanner. "But she cannot argue with a time-stamped, digitized record that has been backed up in 3 different countries. She can rip the paper out of your hands, but she cannot rip the file out of the server." He picked up one of the copied folders before hiding it. He took a red marker and wrote a code on the spine. Project Bluebird. "What is that?" I asked. "Authentication," he said. "If you ever produce these copies in court, a lawyer might say I forged them. They might say I made them up later. But look." He opened the folder. On the bottom of every photocopied page, in his own handwriting, he had written a small note. "Bluebird flies at midnight," or "The eagle has landed on the porch." "They are codes," he said, smiling slightly. "Inside jokes. Things only you and I know, like the time we saw that blue jay steal the cat food, or the time we ate ice cream for dinner because Helen burned the roast. If you have to prove these are real, you explain the codes. Only the original author and the archivist would know what they mean. It proves the chain of custody." He worked through the night. I stayed with him, feeding pages into the scanner, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. It felt like we were conspirators in a crime, but the crime was simply preserving the truth. Around 4 a.m, the rain began to soften. Grandpa Edward opened a drawer and pulled out a heavy cream-colored envelope. It looked old. He melted a stick of red wax over the flap and pressed a heavy brass seal into it. I recognized the symbol. It was the old press seal from the Harbor City Gazette, the paper he had worked for in the 1960s. He handed the envelope to me. It felt heavy, like it contained more than just paper. "This is for you," he said, "but you are not to open it yet." "When do I open it?" I asked, turning it over in my hands. "When you feel silenced," he said. "When you feel like they have taken everything and you have no voice left. When you are standing in a corner and you think the game is over, then you open it." He stood up and stretched, his back cracking. "Now, give me your phone," he said. I unlocked my phone and handed it to him. He tapped away for a minute, his fingers surprisingly agile on the touchscreen. He handed it back. "Open your Notes app," he instructed. I opened the app. At the top of the list, pinned, was a new folder I had never created. It was titled True Record of S.D. I tapped on it. Inside were hundreds of files, PDFs, audio recordings, images. He had shared the cloud folder with me. "You are an editor on this folder," Edward said, "but I am the administrator. That means even if you lose your phone, or if someone wipes it, or if you accidentally delete something in a moment of panic, the master files stay with me." He looked at me, and for the first time that night, he looked like my grandfather again, not the hard-nosed reporter. "I cannot live forever, Steffi," he said softly. "I cannot be there to stop her from saying mean things to you in the kitchen, but I can make sure that when the time comes, her words do not weigh more than yours." I looked at the folder on my screen. True Record of S.D. It was the most valuable thing anyone had ever given me. "Go to bed," he said, turning off the scanner. "We have to put these back on your shelf before the sun comes up. We do not want anyone to know the archives have been duplicated." I went back to my room, clutching the sealed envelope. I hid it in the bottom of my duffel bag, wrapped inside a winter scarf. I fell asleep listening to the rain, thinking about the magazine boxes downstairs. I thought about the files floating in the invisible cloud above the house. I thought I was just a girl writing in a diary to keep from crying. But Grandpa Edward saw me as a witness, and tonight, he had turned my testimony into evidence. He had armed me, and the other side did not even know the war had started. It took exactly 48 hours after we lowered Grandpa Edward into the ground for Veronica to launch her public relations campaign. I had barely had time to unpack my black morning dress before my phone started vibrating off the nightstand. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. The notification on my screen was from a local news alert app, Harbor City Gazette. The headline made the coffee in my stomach turn to acid. Local philanthropist's family. Torn apart. Daughter-in-law. Claims granddaughter manipulated dying man. I clicked the link, my fingers cold. The photo was a masterpiece of staging. It showed Veronica standing outside the gates of the community garden Edward had funded 10 years ago. She was wearing black, looking small and fragile, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Next to her was Daniel, my father, looking stoic and grim, the protective husband standing by his grieving wife. The article was a character assassination disguised as a human interest story. According to the text, Veronica Delgado had been the primary caregiver for Edward Wallace in his final declining years. It claimed that she had cooked his meals, managed his appointments, and been his emotional rock after Helen died. Then, the villain entered the stage. Me. Ms. Delgado claims that her husband's estranged daughter, Stephanie Delgado, an assistant district attorney, used her legal knowledge to coerce the 80-year-old man into changing his will weeks before his death. The article read, "We just want to protect his legacy." Veronica was quoted as saying, "It is not about the money, it is about the principle." Stephanie has always been a troubled girl. She keeps these dark, delusional journals where she rewrites reality. We believe she projected those delusions onto a vulnerable old man. I threw the phone onto the bed, troubled, delusional. She was planting the seeds. She knew about the journals, not what was in them, specifically, but she knew I wrote. She had seen me scribbling in the corner at family gatherings for years. She had mocked me for it. Look at Stephanie, writing her little novel. Now, she was weaponizing that habit. She was turning my coping mechanism into a symptom of mental illness. I did not have time to scream. I had to go to work. The Harbor City District Attorney's Office does not stop for personal drama. I was the lead prosecutor on State v. Miller, a high-profile domestic violence case involving a prominent surgeon who had broken his wife's jaw. The trial was set to begin in 10 days. My desk was a fortress of evidence boxes, police reports, and medical scans. When I walked into the office that morning, the air felt different. Usually, The bullpen is a chaotic symphony of ringing phones, shouting lawyers, and the clatter of keyboards. Today, as I walked to my cubicle, the volume dropped, heads turned, people pretended to be looking for files, but I saw their eyes darting toward me. They had read the article. "Hey, Steph," a junior associate named Marcus said as I passed his desk. He held up a coffee cup, his smile a little too tight. "Rough morning?" I ignored him and went straight to my office, shutting the door. My email inbox was already full, but it was not work emails. It was notifications from Facebook and Instagram. I made the mistake of looking. Veronica had shared the article on her timeline. The caption read, "Heartbroken that it has come to this. Please pray for our family as we try to honor Dad's true wishes." The comment section was a cesspool. Relatives I had not spoken to in a decade, cousins who lived in Ohio, a great aunt who sent generic Christmas cards, were piling on. I always knew there was something off about her. Aunt Linda wrote, "She was so quiet as a kid, always sneaking around." "Money changes people," Cousin Mike added. "So sad she would do this to her own father." "I heard she writes really disturbing things," a friend of Veronica's commented. "Veronica told me she found a notebook once and it was scary. The girl needs help, not a law license." I felt like I was being buried alive under a landslide of pixels. They were rewriting my history in real time. They were taking the silence of a neglected child and rebranding it as the sneakiness of a manipulator. They were taking my journals, my sanctuary, and calling them a manifesto of madness. My office phone rang. It was the internal line. "Stephanie, can you come to my office?" It was the district attorney, Marcus Thorne. I straightened my blazer, took a deep breath, and walked down the hall. Thorne was a good man, a career prosecutor who had seen everything, but he was also a politician. He had an election coming up next year. "Sit down, Stephanie," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. He looked uncomfortable. He shuffled a few papers, avoiding eye contact. "Is this about the Miller case?" I asked, hoping against hope. "No," he said. He sighed. "I received a phone call this morning. From your father, Daniel Delgado." My hands clenched into fists in my lap. Of course, Daniel was not content to let Veronica handle the press. He was attacking my livelihood. "He expressed concern about your current state of mind," Thorne said, choosing his words carefully. He suggested that the stress of losing your grandfather, combined with what he called long-standing emotional issues, might be affecting your judgment. He implied that you might be unfit to handle the Miller trial. I stared at my boss. My father had called my employer to tell him I was crazy. It was a tactical nuclear strike. If he could discredit me professionally, if he could get me pulled from a major case, it would bolster their argument in probate court. "See, even the DA's office thinks she is unstable." "Mr. Thorne," I said, keeping my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "My grandfather passed away 10 days ago. I am grieving, yes, but I have not missed a deadline. I have not missed a filing. My conviction rate is 92%. My father is currently suing me for an inheritance he believes he is owed. This is a litigation tactic." Thorne nodded. "I know that, Stephanie, and I told him that as long as your work is up to standard, your personal life is your own, but—" He slid a piece of paper across the desk. "This came in by courier an hour ago." It was a letter on heavy, bonded letterhead, Harrington and Associates. It was a formal complaint filed with the State Bar Ethics Committee, with a courtesy copy sent to my employer. Fitness to practice. Complaint against Stephanie Delgado. I scanned the document. Blake Harrington was not playing around. The letter alleged that I had violated professional conduct rules by using undue influence and legal deception to secure a beneficiary status in a will. But the paragraph that chilled my blood was the one about the journals. "We have reason to believe the respondent maintains written records that demonstrate a detachment from reality and a deep-seated hostility toward her family members. These writings, described by witnesses as obsessive and paranoid, raise serious questions about her psychological capacity to serve as an officer of the court." They were using my diaries to try to disbar me. I looked up at Thorne. "This is baseless," I said. "They have never even read my journals. They are guessing. They are throwing mud to see what sticks." Thorne leaned back. "Look, Stephanie, I am not taking you off the Miller case. You are the best prosecutor I have for it, but you need to handle this. If the ethics committee opens a formal investigation, it becomes a public record. It could compromise the office." "I understand," I said. Standing up, "I will handle it." I walked back to my office, feeling like the walls were closing in. I closed the door and leaned against it, closing my eyes. My phone buzzed again, a text from a colleague, Sarah, who sat 3 cubicles away. "Hey girl, just saw the article. That sucks. Let me know if you want to grab a drink and vent. I am dying to hear the full story. OMG, your stepmom sounds crazy." It was not support. It was hunger. Sarah wanted the gossip. She wanted to know if the rumors were true. She wanted to be able to tell the other paralegals that she had the inside scoop on the psycho diary girl. I did not reply. I sat at my desk and tried to focus on the Miller case file. I tried to focus on the victim, a woman who had been punched in the face by a man who claimed he loved her. But every time I looked at the witness statements, I saw Veronica's face. I realized then that the journals were no longer just books. They were the centerpiece of the battlefield. Veronica and Blake Harrington had identified them as my weak point. They knew that if they could characterize my private thoughts as madness, they could invalidate everything I said. They could say my testimony about the neglect was a lie. They could say the notes I took about the stolen jewelry were hallucinations. And the terrifying part was, they were doing this without even having the books. They were building a legend of the crazy Stephanie based on nothing but their own accusations. If they actually got their hands on them, if they got the journals and read the angry, raw entries I wrote when I was 20, the ones where I wished they would disappear, the ones where I wrote about how much I hated the sound of Daniel's voice, they would strip all context away. They would read a sentence written in a moment of teenage despair and present it to a judge as proof of a sociopathic mind. I worked until 8 in the evening. I avoided the break room. I avoided eye contact in the hallway. When I finally left the building, the city was dark. I drove home in silence. My apartment, usually my refuge, felt exposed. I found myself checking the locks on the door 3 times. I checked the windows. I went to my bookshelf. There they were, 20 volumes of my life, black spines, lined up neatly. I ran my finger along the spine of the most recent one. It contained the entries from the last 6 months of Grandpa's life. It contained the exact conversations where he told me he was changing the will. It contained his lucid, sharp observations about Veronica's greed. If they took this one, they could destroy the evidence of his competence. If they took the others, they could manufacture the evidence of my insanity. I felt a sudden, crushing exhaustion. I sank onto the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I was fighting a war on 3 fronts: the probate court, the ethics committee, and the court of public opinion, and I was doing it alone. Then, I remembered the envelope. I crawled over to my closet and dug through the duffel bag where I had hidden it the night Grandpa gave it to me. I pulled it out. The wax seal was still intact. The heavy cream paper felt cool against my skin. "When you feel silenced," he had said, "when you feel like they have taken everything and you have no voice left." I held it up to the light. I could not see through it. I was tempted to open it right then. I wanted to know what the magic bullet was. I wanted Grandpa to step out of the envelope and fix this. But I hesitated. Grandpa was a strategist. He said to use it when I was silenced. I was not silenced yet. I was under attack. Yes, I was bleeding. Yes, but I could still speak. I could still fight. I put the envelope back. Not yet. I went back to the bookshelf and looked at the journals. Veronica wanted them. She was obsessed with them. She was telling the world they were full of lies because she was terrified they were full of truth. She thinks she can shame me into hiding them. I whispered to the empty room. She thinks if she calls me crazy enough times, I will burn them myself just to make it stop. I thought about the digital folder, the true record of S.D., floating on a server in Switzerland. I thought about the physical copies hidden in the National Geographic slipcases in Grandpa's study, which was now technically Daniel's house. I smiled, a grim, humorless curving of my lips. Let them come, I thought. Let Blake Harrington file his complaints. Let Daniel make his phone calls. Let Veronica weep to the newspapers. They were shelling an empty fortress. They were obsessed with the paper books on my shelf, thinking they were the only danger. But the real bombs were already planted. They were hidden in the cloud, and they were hidden in the past, in the year 1974, waiting for the right moment to detonate. I stood up and went to the kitchen to make tea. I needed to sleep. Tomorrow, I had a domestic violence trial to prepare for. And after that, I had a stepmother to destroy. Saturday mornings belonged to the dead. For the last 3 years, and especially in the weeks since the funeral, I had carved out a ritual that felt more religious to me than any church service. I would drive to Riverview Cemetery at 8 in the morning, before the dew had burned off the grass, carrying a thermos of black coffee and 2 bouquets of white lilies. It was the only place in Harbor City where I did not feel like a defendant or a prosecutor. I was just a granddaughter. I parked my sedan under the shade of an ancient oak tree and walked down the gravel path toward the family plot. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. I clutched my journal against my chest. It was the latest volume. Number 21, a fresh notebook I had started the day after the funeral. I carried it everywhere. It was a reflex, like breathing, in a world that was rapidly trying to rewrite my reality. This book was my anchor. I reached the graves. Edward and Helen Wallace lay side by side under a polished granite headstone. The earth over Grandpa Edward's side was still unsettled, a fresh scar on the manicured lawn. I knelt down, arranging the flowers in the metal vases. I traced the letters of his name with my fingertip. Edward Wallace, truth seeker. I miss you, I whispered. They are trying to tear it all down. Grandpa, just like you said they would. I opened the journal, uncapped my pen, and began to write. I wrote about the ethics complaint. I wrote about the way my colleagues looked at me. I wrote about the hollow ache in my chest that felt like it was expanding with every passing day. I was so absorbed in the scratch of the nib against the paper that I did not hear the car approach. The sound of a heavy car door slamming shut snapped my head up. 50 feet away, a silver Mercedes had pulled up onto the grass verge. Disregarding the no parking signs, a woman stepped out. It was Veronica. She was not dressed for a cemetery visit. She was dressed for a press conference. She wore a tailored black trench coat that I knew cost more than my first car. Oversized designer sunglasses and leather gloves. Her hair was coiffed into a perfect, immobile helmet of gold. She looked around, scanning the perimeter, checking for photographers, checking for an audience. When her gaze landed on me, her posture shifted. The performance of the grieving widow vanished, replaced by the rigid, predatory stance I knew so well from my childhood kitchen. She marched across the grass, her high heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. She did not look at the headstone. She looked only at me. "Well, look at this," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The grieving granddaughter putting on a show for the worms. I stood up slowly, capping my pen. I did not step back. I was done retreating. "What do you want?" "Veronica?" I asked. "The restraining order hearing isn't until next week." "Restraining order?" she scoffed. Stepping into my personal space. "You are the one harassing us. Stephanie, you and your lies. You and this sick obsession with destroying your father." She gestured violently toward the grave. "You poisoned him." She spat. "You spent years whispering in his ear, telling him we did not care, telling him we were greedy. You took a senile old man, and you twisted his mind until he hated his own son." "That is not true," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Grandpa saw things clearly. He saw exactly who you were." "He saw what you wanted him to see," she screamed, her composure cracking. She took another step closer. I could smell her perfume, a cloying, heavy floral scent that made me nauseous. "And I know how you did it," she hissed. "I know about your little books. Her eyes dropped to the journal in my hand. I tightened my grip on the leather cover. "Daniel told me," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "He told me you have been writing in those things since you were a teenager. Writing lies. Writing fantasies where you are the victim and we are the monsters. You read them to him, didn't you? You read him your little stories until he believed them. I was 18 when you moved in. Veronica," I said, looking her dead in the eye. I was an adult. Everything I wrote was the observation of a grown woman. You do not get to dismiss my reality as a childhood fantasy. "You are sick," she said, shaking her head. "You are mentally unstable, and I am not going to let you use those lies to ruin my husband's reputation in court." She lunged. It happened so fast that my prosecutor's brain, the one trained to analyze crime scenes, barely had time to register the movement. One moment she was standing 3 feet away, and the next, she was clawing at my chest. "Give it to me!" she shrieked. Her leather-gloved hands clamped onto the journal. I instinctively yanked it back, clutching it to my body. "Let go," I yelled. She did not let go. She was fueled by a rage I had never seen fully unleashed before. She dug her fingers into the cover, pulling with a strength that shocked me. We grappled for a second, a grotesque dance over my grandfather's grave. "Give me the book, you little witch." "No." I twisted away, using my leverage to break her grip. I stumbled back, retaining possession of the journal. Veronica stumbled forward, her heel catching in the grass. She regained her balance. Her face flushed a deep, ugly red. Her sunglasses had slid down her nose, revealing eyes that were wide with manic fury. She did not think. She reacted. She swung her right arm in a wide, vicious arc. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud in the quiet morning air. Her open palm connected with the side of my face, striking my cheekbone and ear with the force of a whip. My head snapped to the side. The world spun. My ear instantly began to ring, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the wind. The pain was immediate and hot, spreading across my skin like fire. I gasped, stumbling backward, my grip on the journal loosening from the shock. The book fell from my hands. It landed on the wet grass with a soft thud. For a second, there was absolute silence. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. I cupped my hand to my burning cheek. Staring at her, I was stunned. In all the years of emotional abuse, the cold shoulders, the stolen money, the snide comments, she had never touched me, not once. She was too careful for that. She knew bruises were evidence. But here, in the shadow of the dead, she had lost control. Behind Veronica, about 40 yards away near the maintenance shed, a movement caught my eye. An elderly man in a green jumpsuit, the groundskeeper, had frozen. He was holding a rake. He was staring right at us. He had seen it. He had heard it. Veronica did not see him. She only saw the book lying on the grass. She dove for it. She snatched the journal up like a starving animal grabbing a piece of meat. She held it triumphantly, her chest heaving. "I got it," she panted. "I finally got it." She looked at me, a wild grin on her face. "You think this is going to save you? You think a judge is going to read this trash?" She opened the book. She grabbed a handful of pages, the pages I had written just 10 minutes ago, pouring out my grief, and she ripped. The sound of tearing paper was worse than the slap. It sounded like a bone breaking. "Stop it!" I screamed, stepping forward. She scrambled back, ripping another chunk of pages out. She threw them onto the mud. Then she dropped the book and stomped on it, grinding her expensive heel into the spine, twisting it, trying to break the binding, trying to murder the words. "I will not let you destroy this family," she screamed, stomping again and again. "I will not let you humiliate us." I stopped moving. I watched her. My face was throbbing. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out. But my brain, my cold, analytical prosecutor's brain, suddenly clicked into gear. It was like a shutter snapping shut on a camera lens. Fact: assault and battery. Fact: destruction of property. Fact: witness present. Mr. Alvarez, the head groundskeeper. I knew his name. I had tipped him $20 at Christmas. Fact, security camera. I looked up toward the main gate. The black dome of the surveillance camera was mounted on the stone pillar, angled directly toward the historic section where we were standing. Veronica did not check for cameras. She was too busy destroying the paper. She picked up the mutilated journal. Half the pages were torn out, lying in the mud like white feathers. The cover was bent. She clutched the ruined remains to her chest. She looked at me, her hair disheveled, her breathing ragged. "Now," she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline, "now let us see what you have to tell the court. Let us see how you prove your lies without your little script." She turned and ran. She ran awkwardly across the grass, her heels sinking, clutching my journal as if it were a bag of gold. She reached her Mercedes, threw the door open, and tossed the book onto the passenger seat. She slammed the door. The engine roared to life, and she sped away, tires kicking up gravel as she peeled out of the cemetery gates. I stood alone in the silence. The wind blew a few of the torn pages across the grass. One of them caught on my grandfather's headstone. I sank to my knees. The adrenaline crashed, leaving me shaking violently. I touched my face again. It was tender, swelling rapidly. I could taste copper in my mouth. I had bitten the inside of my cheek when she hit me. I started to cry. It was a guttural, ugly sound that ripped out of my throat. I cried for the stinging pain in my face. I cried for the violation. That book was mine. It was the only place I was allowed to be weak. And she had taken it. She had put her hands on it. She had physically stolen my voice. I reached out and picked up a torn page from the mud. It was smeared with dirt. It was a grocery list I had written for Grandma 3 years ago. Soup, bread, tea. I crumpled it in my fist, sobbing. She won. She finally won. She took the evidence. She took the history. But then, as I stared at the granite headstone, a memory flashed in my mind. I saw a dark study. I saw the glow of a scanner. I saw Grandpa Edward's gnarled hands feeding pages into the machine. I saw the blue progress bar on the laptop screen. "Cloud storage," he had said. The file cabinet in the sky. My crying slowed. My breathing hitched. I looked at the empty road where Veronica had vanished. She had the book. She had the leather, the paper, the ink. She had the physical object she believed was the source of my power. She thought she had disarmed me. She thought she had just burned the Library of Alexandria. She did not know about the scanner. She did not know about the encrypted USB drive sitting in the safety deposit box at First National Bank. She did not know about the server in Switzerland. She did not know about the folder on my phone named True Record of SD. A cold, hard sensation settled in my stomach. It replaced the fear. It replaced the sadness. It was the feeling I got right before I delivered a closing argument when I knew the defendant had just perjured himself. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I stood up, wincing as the movement jarred my bruised face. I looked at Mr. Alvarez, the groundskeeper, who was slowly walking toward me, looking terrified. "Are you okay, Miss Delgado?" he called out, his voice trembling. I saw what she did." "I am fine. Mr. Alvarez," I said. My voice sounded strange, flat and metallic. "Did you see her take my property?" I asked. He nodded vigorously. "I saw it all. I saw her hit you. That was assault." I nodded. "Mr. Alvarez, I need you to do exactly what I say. Do not touch the loose pages on the ground. Go to the office and ask them to preserve the footage from the gate camera for the last 20 minutes. Can you do that for me?" Yes, of course," he said, turning to run toward the office. I looked down at my grandfather's grave. "You knew," I whispered to the dirt. "You knew she would do this. You knew she would try to erase the ink." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the Notes app. I opened the folder. True Record of SD. I pressed the plus sign to create a new entry. My fingers were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I typed, Date, November 24th. Time, 8:15 a.m. Location, Riverview Cemetery. Event, Veronica Delgado approached me, verbally abusive, accused me of manipulating Edward, demanded journal, assaulted me, strike to the left cheek, stole volume 21, destroyed pages, fled scene, witness, Mateo Alvarez, evidence, CCTV footage pending, bruising on face. I hit save. The file uploaded instantly. I watched the little spinning wheel turn into a checkmark. She had stolen a book, but she had just given me a felony. I touched my swelling cheek, and for the first time that morning, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a prosecutor who had just been handed the murder weapon. I walked back to my car, leaving the torn paper on the grass. Let her have the confetti. I had the truth. And now, I was going to use it to bury her. That night, the silence in my apartment was loud enough to rattle the windows. My cheek was throbbing, a dull, rhythmic ache that radiated from my jaw to my temple. I sat on the floor of my living room, an ice pack pressed against my face, staring at the coffee table. On the table sat the envelope. It was the heavy cream-colored packet Grandpa Edward had given me the night of the storm, sealed with the red wax emblem of the Harbor City Gazette. For months, I had treated it like a holy relic, afraid to touch it, afraid that opening it would be an admission that I was in trouble. But I was in trouble. I had been assaulted in a cemetery. My personal journals were in the hands of a woman who would happily burn them or edit them to paint me as a monster. My career was under review. My father was calling me insane. I set the ice pack down. The condensation left a wet ring on the wood. I reached for the envelope. The paper felt thick, expensive, the kind of stationery Grandpa used to steal from the editor's desk in 1968. I slid my finger under the flap and cracked the wax seal. It snapped with a satisfying, brittle sound. Inside, there was a single letter, written in Grandpa's distinct, jagged cursive. It was dated 6 months ago. My dearest Stephanie, if you are breaking this seal, it means the storm I predicted has finally made landfall. It means they have tried to silence you. It means they have likely tried to take the physical evidence of your life away from you. I told you once that history is written by the victors. That is only half true. History is written by the people who keep the best records. And I knew, simply because I know my son and his wife, that they would eventually try to discredit your memory. So, I took liberties. I hope you can forgive an old reporter for protecting his source. You are holding the key to the archive. I did not just scan your journals. Steffi, I organized them. I built a case file. And I hid the backups in 3 places where Veronica's greed will never think to look. Location 1. Mariah Brooks. She is a lawyer at Brooks and Alder. She handles my boring, nonprofit work, so Daniel does not know she exists. She holds the master file. Location 2. The Edward Wallace Journalism Scholarship Fund. There is a small safety deposit box at First National, listed under the chaotic assets of the charity. The key is taped to the back of the framed photo of your grandmother in my study. I hope you grab that photo before they change the locks. Location 3. The Dead Man's Switch. I set up an automated email protocol. If anyone files a legal motion claiming I was mentally incompetent or suffering from dementia, the system triggers a release of documents to the court, to Mariah, and to you. Do not be afraid. The paper they stole is just paper. The truth is in the structure. Love, Grandpa. I read the letter 3 times. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a sudden, overwhelming surge of gratitude. He was gone, but he was still leading the investigation. I did not sleep. The next morning, at 8 o'clock sharp, I was standing in the lobby of Brooks and Alder, a boutique law firm on the 42nd floor of the Skyline Tower. Mariah Brooks was nothing like Blake Harrington. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. She did not wear a $3,000 suit. She wore a sensible wool blazer and looked like a librarian who could kill you with a look. "Stephanie," she said, coming out to the lobby herself. "I was wondering when I would see you. Edward told me you would come when the weather got rough." She led me back to her office. It was cluttered with books and files, smelling of peppermint tea. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She walked to a heavy fireproof filing cabinet in the corner, unlocked it with a key she kept on her wrist, and pulled out a thick, expanding accordion folder. She dropped it on the desk. It made a heavy, solid thud. The label on the front was typed in Grandpa's typewriter font. S.D. Personal Journals. Cross-referenced. Evidence. "Go ahead," Mariah said, sitting down and sipping her tea. "See what he did." I opened the folder. I gasped. It was not just photocopies of my diary pages. It was a masterpiece of forensic annotation. Grandpa had taken my handwritten entries and turned them into exhibits. I turned to a page from when I was 22, in the journal. I had written, "They promised to help with tuition, but Dad called today and said the market is down, so I have to take another loan." Then I saw Veronica's new car in the driveway, a convertible. On Grandpa's version, he had used a red pen to underline "market is down" and "new car." Stapled to the page was a printout of Daniel's bank statement from that exact month, showing a balance of $400,000. Next to it was the invoice for a Mercedes SLK, purchased by Veronica Delgado, 3 days after my father told me he was broke. Grandpa had written a note in the margin. Exhibit A. The allocation of funds. Contradiction of stated financial hardship. I turned another page. This was from a Thanksgiving dinner where I had written, "Veronica told the guests I was failing my classes and that I was probably going to drop out. Everyone looked at me with pity. I have a 4.0 GPA." Stapled to that page was a copy of my official university transcript from that semester. Highlighting my straight A's, below it, Grandpa had clipped a printed email from Veronica to her sister, dated the same day, where she wrote, "Stephanie is doing annoyingly well in school, but I told the aunts she is struggling so they would stop asking why Daniel does not brag about her." I flipped through page after page. Entry. Abandonment. Connected to flight manifest showing Daniel was in Cabo San Lucas on the day of my emergency appendectomy. Entry. Theft. Connected to a pawn shop receipt Grandpa had tracked down, showing Veronica selling my mother's pearl necklace. He had not just preserved my words, he had validated them. He had taken the subjective emotional outpouring of a lonely girl and anchored it to the objective, hard reality of documents, timestamps, and financial trails. He made it bulletproof, I whispered, running my hand over the red ink. Mariah smiled. He spent the last 2 years doing this. He told me that a diary is hearsay, but a diary backed by a forensic audit is a smoking gun. I left Mariah's office with a certified copy of the file tucked under my arm. It felt heavier than lead. My next stop was the bank. I still had the framed photo of Grandma Helen. I had taken it from the house the day after the funeral, mostly because I couldn't bear to leave her staring at Veronica. I had never looked at the back of it. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and pried the cardboard backing off the frame. There, taped with yellowing Scotch tape, was a small brass key. Inside the safety deposit box for the Edward Wallace Scholarship Fund, there was no money. There was only a silver USB drive and a single sealed document. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop right there in the private viewing room of the bank. The folder structure was beautiful. Folder 1. The lies about money. Folder 2. The lies about love. Folder 3. The isolation tactics. And inside the physical document, I found the final nail in the coffin. It was the original draft of the amendment to his will. It was dated 8 months ago. In it, Edward wrote in plain English, not legalese. "I am removing Veronica Delgado from any position of authority regarding my estate, not because of any undue influence from my granddaughter, but because I have observed over 20 years of consistent financial predation. I have documented these instances in the accompanying archive. Any claim that I am not of sound mind is to be countered with the logs of our daily chess games, which I have won consistently until the week of my death." He had logged our chess games, every move, every victory, proof that his mind was sharper than a razor until the very end. As I walked out of the bank, my phone buzzed. It was an email notification. Subject: Automated Disclosure, Protocol 77. From Edward Wallace, deceased. My heart stopped. I opened it. To the Honorable Court of Riverview County, Attorney Blake Harrington, Attorney Mariah Brooks, Stephanie Delgado. Body. This is an automated message triggered by a filing in the Riverview Probate Court, alleging the mental incapacity of Edward Wallace. Please find attached the encrypted digital archive of the decedent's personal logs, cross-referenced with financial records, contradicting the plaintiff's assertions. The password has been provided to Ms. Delgado. I stood on the sidewalk, pedestrians rushing past me, and I started to laugh. I laughed until tears streamed down my bruised face. People looked at me like I was crazy, but I did not care. Veronica and Daniel had filed their lawsuit this morning. They had officially claimed he was senile, and the moment the court clerk entered the keyword incapacity or dementia into the case file, which must have been linked to the system Grandpa hacked or monitored, the dead man's switch had fired. Grandpa Edward, the man who pretended he did not know how to use the remote control for the television, had just robo-served them from the grave. I looked at the email again. It was sent to Blake Harrington. Right now, in his plush office, Veronica's shark of a lawyer was receiving thousands of pages of proof that his client was a liar. He was seeing the receipts. He was seeing the pawn shop tickets. He was seeing the emails Veronica thought she had deleted. And he was seeing my journals, not the torn, muddy pages Veronica had stolen in the cemetery, but the pristine, annotated, evidence-backed versions. I wiped the tears from my eyes. Veronica thought she had won this morning. She thought that by physically wresting a leather notebook from my hands, she had silenced me. She thought the original was the thing made of paper and glue. She did not understand that to a journalist, the original is the story itself. The paper is just the wrapper. I got into my car and tossed the heavy file from Mariah onto the passenger seat. The pain in my cheek was still there, hot and throbbing, but the panic was gone. Grandpa Edward's voice echoed in my head, dry and amused. Do not ever bet your whole life on a single notebook. Steffi. I started the engine. Let her keep the book she stole. I thought, let her burn it. Let her shred it. Let her dance around the ashes. She was holding a decoy. I had the master tape, and I was about to hit play. The conference room at Brooks and Alder was silent, except for the rhythmic sound of a stapler and the hum of a high-end scanner. We had turned the mahogany table into a war room. Stacks of paper covered every available inch of surface area. To the untrained eye, it looked like chaos. To me, it looked like an autopsy of a 20-year con. I was not working alone. Beside me was Mariah Brooks, Grandpa Edward's attorney, who was currently organizing financial affidavits with the precision of a surgeon. Across from me sat Jonah Price. Jonah was a colleague from the district attorney's office, a forensic accountant and investigator who I trusted with my life. He had taken a week of personal leave to help me, mostly because he despised bullies, and partially because he had seen the bruises on my face. We were building the countersuit. We were taking the raw data from Grandpa's file cabinet in the sky and turning it into a legal weapon. Jonah picked up a page from my journal, or rather, a high-resolution printout of a scan from the cloud. He read it, frowned, and tossed it into the discard pile. No, Jonah said, rubbing his eyes. We cannot use that one. Why not? I asked, feeling a spike of defensiveness. That was the day she told me I was too fat to wear my prom dress. It shows cruelty. It shows she is mean, Jonah corrected, his voice calm but firm. Being mean is not illegal. Steph, being a wicked stepmother is not grounds for disinheritance. We need to focus. We are not trying to prove she is a bad person. We are trying to prove she is a financial predator who engaged in a systematic campaign of isolation and fraud. He picked up another sheet. This, he said, tapping the paper, this is what we need. I looked at the entry. It was dated 4 years ago, November 12th. Veronica came over while Dad was in the car. She asked Grandpa for a check for $5,000 for urgent roof repairs on the rental property. She told him not to tell Daniel because it would hurt his pride. Jonah slid a bank statement across the table. And here's the check clearing 2 days later. Jonah said, and here, Courtesy of the public records search I ran this morning, is the permit history for that rental property. No roof permits were pulled in that year. No contractors were hired. He slapped a third document down. But, Jonah continued, a grim smile playing on his lips, Veronica's credit card statement from that same month shows a charge of $4,800 at a luxury medical spa in Scottsdale. That is the narrative, Mariah added, looking up from her files. We are not telling a story about a sad daughter. We are telling a story about a bank. And Edward Wallace was the bank. We spent the next 6 hours refining the file. It was grueling work. We had to separate the emotional from the evidentiary. I had to let go of the pages where I poured out my heart about my loneliness because, as Jonah put it, juries ignore feelings. They respect math. Grandpa Edward had given us the raw materials, but we had to build the structure. He had cross-referenced a lot, but he did not have access to the public databases Jonah did. We found the sick week in my journal, volume 14. I had written, Grandma's funeral week. Veronica says she is too heartbroken and physically ill to help with the arrangements. She has locked herself in her room. Dad says we have to respect her grieving process. Jonah found the flight manifest. While I was choosing a casket for my grandmother, Veronica Delgado was on a flight to Cabo San Lucas. While I was holding my grandfather's hand at the wake, she was checking into a 5-star resort. We found the email she sent to Daniel on that Tuesday. My migraine is blinding. Darling, I am going to try to sleep it off. Please tell Stephanie I am sorry I cannot be there to support her. Jonah pinned the email printout next to a photo Veronica had been tagged in on Facebook by a stranger, a bartender in Cabo. The timestamp matched the email within an hour. She was holding a margarita, laughing, wearing a bikini. Grandpa had missed that photo, but he had caught the credit card charge for the resort, which he had circled in red ink with the note, Grief looks expensive. We had her. We had her on a timeline of lies that stretched back a decade. But documents were only half the battle. We needed witnesses. I called Mr. Alvarez, the groundskeeper from Riverview Cemetery. He agreed to meet us at a diner near the courthouse. He was a quiet man, terrified of getting involved, but he was a father. When he saw the purple bruise blooming on my cheekbone, his hesitation vanished. She hit you hard, Miss Delgado, he said, signing the affidavit Jonah had prepared. I heard the sound. It was like a branch snapping. And then she took your book. She ran like a thief. We attached his sworn statement to the USB drive containing the security footage. The manager of the cemetery had been cooperative, especially after I mentioned that the assault of a county prosecutor on their grounds was a liability issue they might want to get ahead of. The video was grainy, black and white, and silent, but the violence was undeniable. You could see Veronica lunge. You could see my head snap back. You could see her stomping on the pages. It turned a family dispute into a felony robbery and assault. By Wednesday afternoon, our team had grown. It seemed that Veronica had made more enemies than she realized. Mariah had reached out to the former staff members who had worked at my grandfather's house over the years. I expected resistance. People usually do not want to testify against their former employers. I was wrong. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who had worked for my grandparents for 15 years until Daniel fired her last month, came to the office voluntarily. She sat in the chair, twisting her handbag strap, looking angry. She was always sniffing around, Mrs. Gable told us, her voice tight. Every time Mr. Wallace took a nap, she was in the study. I caught her trying the handle of the safe twice. She told me she was looking for a stamp. Who looks for a stamp in a locked floor safe? Jonah was typing furiously. Did she ever ask you for information? Mrs. Gable nodded. She offered me $500 once, just to tell her the password to Mr. Wallace's laptop. She said she wanted to install a screensaver of the grandchildren as a surprise. I laughed. A harsh bark of a sound. I was the only grandchild, and she hated me. We took the statement, attempted unauthorized access, attempted bribery of staff. But the biggest weapon came from Mariah herself. Late that evening, as we were eating cold takeout cartons of noodles, Mariah walked in with a file she had pulled from the county archives. It was dusty and smelled of old mildew. "I did some digging into Veronica's history before she met your father," Mariah said, dropping the file on the table. Her maiden name was not Miller. It was Kowalski, and before that, it was Davis. I opened the file. It was a court transcript from a county 3 hours north of Harbor City. The date was 25 years ago. Estate of Arthur Davis versus Veronica Davis. "She did this before," I whispered, scanning the pages. "She was 25, Mariah explained. "She married a man of 70. He died 2 years later. His children sued her for undue influence. She countersued, claiming the children were abusive and had abandoned him. I looked at the outcome. Settled out of court for an undisclosed sum." "And here's another one," Mariah said, dropping a second file. 12 years ago, just before she met your father, she was the live-in caregiver for an elderly woman named Mrs. Thorne. Mrs. Thorne changed her will 3 weeks before she died, leaving everything to Veronica. The nieces sued. Veronica claimed the nieces were mentally unstable and jealous. My blood ran cold. The script. It was the exact same script. The unstable relative, the devoted caregiver, the sudden change of heart by the deceased. "She is a professional," Jonah said, leaning back in his chair, looking at the ceiling. "She is not just a greedy stepmother, Stephanie. She is a black widow who uses probate court instead of poison." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. For years, I had internalized this conflict. I thought it was about me. I thought she hated me. I thought I was the problem, the unlovable daughter who could not compete with her charm. But I was just an obstacle. I was just the latest character in a play she had staged 3 times already. My father was not her love interest. He was her mark. And Grandpa Edward. Grandpa Edward was the first victim who had been smart enough to see the strings. Jonah looked at me across the table. His eyes were serious. "You realize what this means, right?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "It means we have a pattern of conduct. It means we can bring in these prior acts to prove intent." "No," Jonah said. "I mean, do you realize what you are doing?" He pointed to the stack of files. The journals, the bank statements, the affidavits, the old court cases. "You are not just defending your inheritance, Steph, and you are not just defending your reputation. If you do not stop her here, if you do not destroy her credibility and get a judgment on the record, she will do this again. She will bleed your father dry, and then she will move on to the next old man with a pension and a lonely heart." He leaned forward. "You are not a victim in a family drama anymore. You are a prosecutor taking down a career criminal." I looked at the pile of evidence. Jonah was right. The anger that had been burning in my chest, the hot, reactive anger of a hurt child, began to cool. It hardened into something colder, sharper. It hardened into resolve. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard where we had mapped out the case. I picked up a red marker. At the top of the board, I had written defense strategy. I erased it. In its place, I wrote the true record. "We are not settling," I said, turning to Mariah and Jonah. "We are not making a deal to make her go away. We are going to file a countersuit for fraud, theft, and malicious prosecution. We are going to put her previous victims on the stand. We are going to play the video of her hitting me in open court." Mariah smiled, a terrifying, shark-like smile. "I was hoping you would say that." We worked until 2 a.m. We compiled the digital dossier. We linked every single lie Veronica had told the press to a document that disproved it. When we were finished, I sat at the computer to save the master file. The true record of S.D. I stared at the folder icon on the desktop. It was the same name Grandpa had given the cloud folder. I felt a strange sensation, like a hand resting on my shoulder. It was the same weight I used to feel when Grandpa stood behind me at the kitchen table, reading over my shoulder as I did my homework. "Write it down, Steffi. Anyone who twists this later will pay the price for it." I hit the save button. The drive whirred. The lights on the server blinked. "Let us go home," I said to Jonah and Mariah. "We have court in 48 hours. and I want to be well rested when I watch her face fall apart. I walked out of the office into the cool night air. The city lights of Harbor City were twinkling below us. Somewhere out there, in my father's house, Veronica was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of the money she was going to spend. She was probably thinking about the torn journal, convinced she had won. She had no idea that a team of 3 lawyers and a ghost had just built a cage around her, and the door was already locking. The air in courtroom 3B was colder than usual, or perhaps it was just the icy precision with which Blake Harrington was dissecting my character. The trial had officially begun, and my father's lawyer was earning every cent of his exorbitant retainer. He paced in front of the judge's bench, his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the carpet, gesturing toward me as if I were a dangerous animal he had managed to corner. "Your Honor," Blake began, his voice smooth and baritone, designed to vibrate with authority. "We are here to discuss a will, yes, but to understand why Edward Wallace, a man of sound mind and generous spirit, would cut off his own son. We must understand the poison that was whispered in his ear, and the source of that poison sits right there." He pointed a manicured finger at me. I did not flinch. I sat next to Mariah Brooks, my posture perfect, my face a mask of professional disinterest. I had practiced this face in the mirror for 3 days. "Stephanie Delgado is not just a grieving granddaughter," Blake continued. "She is a prosecutor. She is trained in the art of manipulation. But more than that, she is a woman deeply obsessed with a narrative of victimhood. She has spent 20 years documenting every perceived slight, every imagined insult, twisting the mundane interactions of a loving family into a gothic horror story. And she used these fabrications to terrify an elderly man into compliance." He paused for effect, looking at the gallery. "She keeps journals, Your Honor, thousands of pages of them, a manifesto of hatred against the woman who tried to be her mother." I watched Veronica. She was sitting in the front row behind the plaintiff's table, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked small, fragile, and utterly defeated. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. When she took the stand an hour later, the performance escalated. "Veronica Delgado," Blake asked gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your stepdaughter?" Veronica sniffled into the microphone. "I tried. Blake, I really tried. When I married Daniel, I wanted us to be a real family. I bought her clothes. I cooked her favorite meals. But she was so cold. She would just stare at me. And she was always writing in those little black books, scribbling, watching me. It was unnerving." She looked at Judge Sloan, her eyes wide and wet. "I found out later that she was writing lies about me." Veronica sobbed. "She wrote that I starved her. She wrote that I stole from her. She poisoned Edward's mind against me. She made him think I was a monster so she could keep all the money for herself." It was infuriating to listen to. Every instinct in my body wanted to jump up and scream, "Objection! Calls for speculation! Lying under oath." But I stayed seated. I let her talk. I let her paint herself as the martyr. Then came the moment we had been waiting for. "Your Honor," Blake said, walking back to his table, "we would like to introduce into evidence a portion of one of these journals. This item was recovered by my client, who felt it was necessary to show the court the level of vitriol Ms. Delgado harbors." He held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was the battered, mud-stained leather journal Veronica had stolen from me at the cemetery. It looked pathetic, like a wounded bird. Mariah Brooks stood up. No objection to the admission. "Your Honor." Blake looked surprised. He expected a fight. He expected me to claim privacy. He did not know we wanted that book in evidence just as much as he did. Blake opened the bag and pulled out the book. He turned to a page that had been dog-eared. "I am reading from an entry dated 2 years ago," Blake announced. "I wish she would disappear from this house. I look at her and I imagine the police coming to take her away in handcuffs. I imagine her crying as they put her in the car. It is the only thing that makes me smile." He closed the book with a snap. "This, Your Honor, is not the writing of a rational woman. This is a fantasy of revenge, and we believe she acted on this fantasy by manipulating the testator." The courtroom was silent. Daniel looked down at his hands, ashamed or pretending to be. Veronica looked vindicated. Judge Sloan turned to me. Ms. Delgado, do you deny writing those words? I stood up. I did not need to be sworn in again. I was answering as the respondent. No, Your Honor, I said clearly. I wrote those words. Blake smirked. He thought he had me. But, I continued, my voice hardening, context is everything. Mr. Harrington, you are reading a fragment of a paragraph. You are reading the anger of a daughter who had just watched her stepmother sell her deceased mother's jewelry to pay for a spa weekend. Blake waved his hand dismissively. The hostility speaks for itself. Does it? I asked. Or does it speak to the fact that you are holding a crime scene in your hands? Mariah stood up then. She walked to the center of the room. She was holding a remote control. Your Honor, Mariah said, if the plaintiff is going to use the respondent's journals as evidence of her character, then the rule of completeness applies. We are entitled to see the full document, not just the cherry-picked excerpts Mr. Harrington has decided to share. We do not have the full document, Blake argued. The journal fell apart. Some pages were lost. How convenient, Mariah said dryly. Fortunately, the late Edward Wallace was a man of foresight. Mariah pointed the remote at the large screen mounted on the wall to the left of the witness stand. Your Honor, I would like to present Defense Exhibit C. This is a digital scan of the exact same journal entry Mr. Harrington just read. This scan was created by Edward Wallace and uploaded to a secure cloud server 3 days after the entry was written. The screen flickered to life. On the left side was a photo of the physical page Blake was holding, torn, ragged, ending abruptly. On the right side was the high-resolution scan of the original page. Please look at the sentence immediately following the one Mr. Harrington read, Mariah instructed. The entire courtroom looked at the screen. The highlighted text was legible, clear, and damning. I imagine her crying as they put her in the car. It is the only thing that makes me smile. But I would never touch her. I would never hurt her. I just write it down to keep from going crazy. I write it down so I do not become like them. The silence in the room changed. It shifted from judgment to realization. The violent fantasy was suddenly revealed to be a coping mechanism, explicitly nonviolent. Blake Harrington stiffened. He looked at the screen, then at the book in his hand. He realized he had walked into a trap. Mariah turned to Veronica, who was still sitting in the witness box. Her face had gone pale. Mrs. Delgado? Mariah asked, her voice deceptively pleasant. You testified earlier that you found this journal. Could you clarify for the court exactly where you found it? Veronica hesitated. Her eyes darted to Blake, but he could not help her. She was under oath. I found it in the house, Veronica stammered. In the living room. Mariah clicked the remote again. The screen changed. It was now playing a grainy black and white video. It was the security footage from Riverview Cemetery. The timestamp was clear. November 24th, 8:15 in the morning. The video showed a woman in a trench coat lunging at a younger woman. It showed the slap, a violent, jarring motion even on the silent screen. It showed the older woman wrestling the book away, ripping pages out, and stomping on them in the mud. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even the bailiff leaned forward. Daniel Delgado stood up halfway in his seat, staring at the screen in horror. He had not known about the slap. He had believed Veronica's story that I threw the book at her. Is that you in the video, Mrs. Delgado? Mariah asked. Is that you? Assaulting a district attorney at her grandfather's grave and stealing the evidence you just presented to this court? Veronica was trembling. She provoked me. She was saying terrible things. So you admit you did not find the journal in the house? Mariah pressed. You admit you took it by force? Yes, Veronica whispered. Mariah turned to the back of the courtroom. The defense calls Mr. Mateo Alvarez to the stand, Mariah announced. Mr. Alvarez, the groundskeeper, walked nervously to the front. He looked terrified of being in a courtroom, but when he looked at me, he gave a small, firm nod. He took the oath. "Mr. Alvarez," Mariah asked, "were you working at Riverview Cemetery on the morning of November 24th? "Yes, ma'am," he said, clutching his hat. "Did you witness an altercation between the two women sitting here?" "I did," he said. "Can you tell the court what you saw?" Mr. Alvarez pointed a shaking finger at Veronica. "That lady, she hit Miss Stephanie. She hit her real hard. I heard it. Then she took the book, and she started ripping it. She was screaming that she wouldn't let anyone see it. Then she ran away." "Thank you. Mr. Alvarez." Mariah turned back to Judge Sloan. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has attempted to introduce a document obtained through robbery and assault, and has further attempted to mislead the court by presenting a mutilated version of that document to alter its meaning." Blake Harrington was sweating. He stood up, trying to salvage the sinking ship. "Your Honor, we move to strike the journal from the record. If the provenance is in question, it should be excluded entirely." He wanted it gone. He realized the weapon had turned in his hand. Judge Sloan peered over her glasses. Her face was like granite. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Sloan said, her voice dangerously quiet, "you are the one who introduced the journal. You opened the door. You cannot slam it shut just because you do not like what walked through it." She looked at the screen, where the side-by-side comparison was still glowing. "The journal stays admitted," Judge Sloan ruled. "In fact, I am now ordering that the defense be allowed to present the entire digital archive of these journals. If the plaintiff's argument is that these writings prove Ms. Delgado's character, then the court needs to see the full picture. Not just the anger, Mr. Harrington, but the cause of the anger." She turned her gaze to me, and for a fleeting second, there was a flicker of something that looked like respect. "We will see if these journals depict a pattern of obsession, as you claim," Judge Sloan said to Blake, "or if, as the digital timestamps suggest, they depict a pattern of survival." I sat back in my chair. I looked across the aisle at Veronica. She was not crying anymore. The act was over. She was staring at the table, her hands clenching and unclenching. She knew what was in the rest of those files. She knew about the sick week in Cabo. She knew about the stolen jewelry. She had brought a knife to a gunfight, and she had just realized that the gun was held by a ghost. I looked at the screen one last time. The words I write it down so I do not become like them seemed to glow brighter than the rest. Grandpa was right. The truth, once preserved, was a stubborn thing. It did not just defend. It hunted, and the hunt was just beginning. The courtroom had shifted. You could feel it in the air pressure. What had started as a morning of accusations against my sanity had turned into an autopsy of my stepmother's character, and the body was beginning to smell. Mariah Brooks did not let the momentum die. She called Dr. Eris Thorne to the stand. He was a forensic psychologist with 30 years of experience, a man who had analyzed serial killers and corporate psychopaths. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the jury box, though there was no jury, only Judge Sloan. "Dr. Thorne," Mariah asked, standing next to the projection of my journal entry, "you have reviewed the respondents' journals. In your professional opinion, do these writings indicate a detachment from reality or a danger to others?" "Dr." Thorne shook his head. "Absolutely not. Journaling is a standard, highly recommended therapeutic tool for processing complex trauma. Ms. Delgado was writing in a private medium to externalize her anger rather than acting on it. It is the definition of a healthy coping mechanism. The person who screams in a diary so they do not scream in a kitchen is not unstable. They are disciplined." He took off his glasses and looked directly at Veronica. "On the other hand," he continued, his voice clinical and cold, "the act of stealing a private journal, reading it, and then using it to humiliate a family member in a public forum suggests a profound lack of boundaries and a desire to control the narrative that borders on pathological." Veronica shrank in her seat. The concerned mother mask was slipping, revealing the panic underneath. But the psychological profile was just the appetizer. The main course was the money. Mariah called our forensic accountant to the stand. He set up a tripod with a large poster board covered in charts and graphs. It looked like a corporate earnings report, but it was actually a timeline of the Bank of Grandpa. "Your Honor," the accountant began, pointing to a red line that spiked upward repeatedly over the last 15 years. "We have analyzed the banking records of Edward Wallace from 2010 to the present. We found a consistent pattern." He tapped a spike on the chart. In June of 2012, Daniel Delgado requested a loan of $15,000 for emergency medical bills related to his wife's back pain. Edward Wallace wrote the check on June 4th. He moved his pointer to a blue line. On June 6th, 2 days later, a charge of $14,500 appeared on a credit card solely in Veronica Delgado's name. It was for a first-class tour package to Italy. The courtroom murmured. "This pattern repeats 42 times," the accountant stated. "We have roof repairs that coincide with the purchase of a diamond bracelet. We have car transmission failures that align perfectly with the dates of spa retreats. In total, over the last decade, nearly $400,000 flowed from Edward Wallace to the plaintiffs under false pretenses." I watched Daniel. He was staring at the table, his face gray. He knew. Of course he knew. He had been the bagman. He had looked his father in the eye, asked for money to save his family from ruin, and then spent it on keeping his trophy wife happy. But Mariah was not done. She had a ghost to summon. "The defense calls Mrs. Sarah Thorne to the stand," Mariah announced. The name caused a ripple of confusion. Even Judge Sloan looked at her docket, but Veronica froze. Her back went rigid. She knew that name. A woman in her 40s walked into the courtroom. She looked nervous but determined. She took the oath and sat down. "Mrs. Thorne," Mariah asked gently, "are you related to the forensic psychologist who just testified?" "No," Sarah said. "It is a common name." "And do you know the plaintiff, Veronica Delgado?" Sarah looked at Veronica. Her eyes were filled with a decade of unspent anger. "Yes," Sarah said. "I know her as Veronica Davis. She was my grandmother's live-in nurse 12 years ago." Blake Harrington stood up, objecting. "Your Honor, relevance? This is ancient history." "It is pattern evidence, Your Honor," Mariah countered sharply. "It goes to intent and method." "Overruled," Judge Sloan said. "Proceed." "Mrs. Thorne," Mariah continued, "how did your grandmother's relationship with Veronica end?" Sarah took a deep breath. "My grandmother died 3 weeks before she passed. She changed her will. She left everything to Veronica. She said Veronica was the only one who loved her. When we tried to contest it, Veronica told the court that I was unstable. She said I was a greedy granddaughter who had abandoned my Nana. She even produced a diary she claimed I kept." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. "She sued us for defamation," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We settled. We gave her $50,000 just to go away because we couldn't handle the stress. She took the money and bought a convertible." I looked at Veronica. She was not looking at the witness. She was staring straight ahead, her knuckles white as she gripped her purse. I sat there, feeling a strange mix of horror and relief. I was not special. I was not the black sheep. I was just a line item on a spreadsheet that Veronica had been running for 20 years. She was not a mother. She was a franchise. And her business model was elder abuse disguised as family drama. "Thank you. Mrs. Thorne," Mariah said. Blake Harrington declined to cross-examine. He knew better. He looked like a man who wanted to crawl under the table. Then came the documents from the safety deposit box. Mariah projected the amendment to Edward's will onto the screen. It was not the legal jargon everyone expected. It was a personal letter, notarized and witnessed. "I, Edward Wallace, being of sound mind and body, hereby remove Veronica Delgado from the board of the Edward Wallace Scholarship Fund. I take this action due to a clear conflict of interest and a 15-year history of financial requests that I now recognize as manipulative." The date on the document was 8 months ago. And then, the automated email. The clerk read it into the record. It was the email triggered by the filing of their lawsuit this morning. "If you are reading this," the email began. It means my son and his wife have filed a motion claiming I am mentally incompetent. I anticipated this. They will likely claim I was confused. They will likely claim I was influenced by Stephanie. Please find attached the audio logs of every conversation I had with Veronica regarding money in the last year of my life. I recorded them on my phone. She is not a concerned daughter-in-law. She is a persistent solicitor. Blake Harrington rubbed his temples. He looked at Daniel. Do you have anything else? Blake hissed, loud enough for me to hear. Because right now, we are drowning. Daniel, looking desperate, reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. He whispered frantically to Blake. Blake looked at the paper, hesitated, and then shrugged. It was a Hail Mary pass. Your Honor, Blake said, standing up, we have one final piece of evidence, a letter, handwritten by Edward Wallace 2 days before he died. He walked the paper up to the bench. My client found this in Mr. Wallace's bedside table, Blake said. In it, the deceased admits that he felt pressured by Stephanie. He writes, and I quote, I am just changing the will to make her stop yelling at me. I just want peace. I felt a cold spike of fear. Grandpa had never written that. I knew he hadn't. Mariah stood up. May we see this document? Blake handed it over. Mariah looked at it. She did not panic. She walked back to our table and handed it to Jonah. Jonah pulled a jeweler's loop out of his pocket. He carried it for examining forged checks. He leaned over the paper. He looked at it for 10 seconds. Then he looked up at me and winked. Your Honor, Mariah said, we would like to call our final witness, Mr. Arthur Penn, a forensic document examiner. He has been on standby in the gallery. Mr. Penn took the stand. He was a small man with thick glasses. He took the letter Daniel had produced and placed it under the document camera on the witness stand, which projected the image onto the big screen. Mr. Penn? Mariah asked. Is this a genuine letter written by Edward Wallace? Mr. Penn zoomed the camera in on the body of the text. The handwriting appears to be an attempt at Mr. Wallace's style. Mr. Penn said, but look at the tremor in the lines. It is too rhythmic. It suggests a tracing, or someone trying to copy a style slowly. Edward Wallace's writing was fast and jagged. This is slow and deliberate. Then he zoomed in on the signature at the bottom. But this is the smoking gun, Mr. Penn said. On the big screen, the signature Edward Wallace looked normal at first, but under the extreme magnification of the forensic camera, you could see a faint, gray halo around the ink. Do you see these pixels? Mr. Penn asked, pointing to the screen. This signature was not written with a pen. It was printed. It is a high-resolution inkjet print. Someone scanned a genuine signature from another document, used image editing software to remove the background, and printed it onto this page. He pointed to a tiny yellow dot on the paper, barely visible. And this, he added, this is a tracking dot from a color laser printer. Most modern printers leave a microscopic code on every page to prevent counterfeiting. I can scan this code and tell you exactly which printer model produced this document. I would bet my career it matches the printer in Mr. Daniel Delgado's home office. The courtroom was dead silent. It was not just a lost case anymore. It was a crime, attempted fraud, forgery, perjury. I looked at Daniel. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at his hands, his face the color of ash. He had tried to frame his own father. He had tried to put words in the mouth of a dead man to rob his own daughter. And Veronica? She was staring at Daniel with pure hatred, not because he had done it, but because he had done it badly, because he had gotten caught. Judge Sloan slowly lowered her reading glasses. She looked at the screen, where the fake signature loomed large, a testament to their greed and their stupidity. Then she looked at the plaintiff's table. Mr. Harrington, Judge Sloan said, her voice dangerously low. I suggest you take a moment to consult with your clients regarding the penalties for submitting forged evidence to a court of law. Blake Harrington looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. I was not aware of the provenance of this document. Your Honor, I withdraw it immediately. You do not get to withdraw a felony. Mr. Harrington, the judge snapped. She turned to face the entire courtroom. I have sat on this bench for 20 years, Judge Sloan said. I have seen families fight over china sets and houses, but I have rarely seen a pattern of deception this calculated. She looked at me. We have heard testimony that Ms. Delgado is obsessive, that she is stuck in the past. But what I have seen today is not obsession, it is documentation, and thank heavens for it. She picked up the gavel, holding it like a weapon. The court has seen enough, she declared. We have seen a pattern that spans 15 years. We have seen a pattern that spans multiple families. And we have seen a pattern of one person benefiting from the misery of others. She looked directly at Veronica. This is not a probate case anymore. Mrs. Delgado, this is an indictment of your entire history. I sat back in my chair. The adrenaline that had been holding me up for weeks finally let go. I felt heavy, exhausted, but incredibly light all at the same time. Mariah reached over and squeezed my hand. We got them, she whispered. I looked at the empty chair next to me. I could almost see Grandpa sitting there, wearing his old tweed jacket, smiling that crooked smile. I told you, Steffi, I imagined him saying. The truth is the only thing they cannot print a fake copy of. The judge began to read her findings into the record, but I was barely listening to the legal terms. I was watching the mask fall off Veronica's face. It was not sliding off anymore. It had shattered. She looked old. She looked mean. And for the first time in my life, she looked powerless. She had spent 20 years building a fortress out of lies, and Grandpa Edward had just kicked out the cornerstone. The sound of the gavel striking the wooden block was not loud, but it felt like it shattered the air in the courtroom. It was a singular, definitive note that signaled the end of a war that had started quietly in a kitchen 20 years ago. Judge Miriam Sloan did not look at the papers in front of her. She looked directly at the plaintiff's table, where Veronica and Daniel were sitting. Daniel was slumped over, staring at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger. Veronica was sitting rigid, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. She looked like a statue made of ice that was beginning to crack under the heat of the spotlight. It is the judgment of this court, Judge Sloan began, her voice steady and echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room, that the last will and testament of Edward Wallace, dated March 12th, is valid and enforceable. The allegations of undue influence brought by the plaintiffs are found to be without merit. She paused, letting the words sink in. Furthermore, Judge Sloan continued, her eyes narrowing, based on the overwhelming documentary evidence presented by the defense, including forensic accounting records and digital logs verified by this court, I am granting the motion to dismiss the plaintiff's claim with prejudice. This means you cannot refile. You cannot come back. This door is closed. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 18 years old. Beside me, Mariah Brooks capped her pen. It was a small gesture of victory. But Judge Sloan was not finished. In my 20 years on the bench, she said, her voice dropping to a register that was dangerously low, I have rarely seen a more cynical abuse of the legal system. The plaintiffs did not just bring a frivolous suit. They attempted to use this court as a weapon to silence a witness and legitimize a decades-long pattern of financial exploitation. They introduced evidence obtained through assault, and most egregiously, they submitted a document with a forged signature. She picked up a separate file from her desk. Therefore, I am ordering the plaintiffs, Daniel and Veronica Delgado, to pay the entirety of the respondents' legal fees, court costs, and a punitive damage award of $100,000 for the malicious prosecution and emotional distress inflicted upon Ms. Delgado. A gasp went up from the gallery. $100,000. It was a number that would drain their liquid assets. It was a number that meant no more luxury vacations, no more new cars, and likely no more house. But the judge had one final hammer to drop. Finally, she said, looking at the bailiff, I am referring the record of these proceedings, specifically the testimony regarding the forged letter and the assault at Riverview Cemetery, to the District Attorney's Office of Pine County. I am recusing the Harbor City office to avoid any conflict of interest given Ms. Delgado's employment there, but I strongly recommend that the special prosecutor investigate charges of perjury, forgery, and tampering with evidence. Veronica made a sound. It was a small, strangled whimper. She covered her mouth with her hand. She had walked into this courtroom expecting to walk out with $1 million. Instead, she was walking out with a massive debt and a potential prison sentence looming over her head. The judge banged the gavel one last time. Court is adjourned. The room erupted into noise. Reporters who had been sitting in the back row scrambled for the doors, dialing their editors. I stood up slowly. My legs felt shaky, but my head was clear. I turned to look at them. Veronica was staring at me. The hatred was still there, but it was buried under a thick layer of terror. She looked at Blake Harrington, her shark of a lawyer, but he was already packing his briefcase, refusing to make eye contact with her. He knew he might be facing an ethics review himself. I walked toward the aisle. I wanted to leave. I wanted to breathe fresh air. Stephanie. The voice was desperate. I stopped and turned. Daniel Delgado was standing by the railing. He looked older than I had ever seen him. His face was gray, lined with the stress of a man who realized he had bet on the wrong horse and lost the farm. "Stephanie, wait," he said, reaching a hand out but stopping short of touching me. I looked at his hand. It was the hand that had signed the checks for Veronica's vacations while I was eating ramen noodles in my college dorm. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. You do not have to let them press charges. We can talk to the judge. We can work something out." I said nothing. I just watched him. "Honey," he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "Look at us. We are still family. You are my daughter. We are the only family left." The word hung in the air between us. Family. For years, that word had been a leash. It had been the reason I stayed silent at Thanksgiving dinners. It had been the reason I accepted the crumbs of affection he tossed my way. It had been the weapon they used to guilt me into compliance. But standing there, with the weight of Grandpa's files in my bag and the bruise still yellowing on my cheek, I realized the leash had snapped. I looked at him, and I felt a strange, hollow peace. I did not hate him. I just did not need him. "Family," I said, my voice calm and devoid of anger, "are the people who do not need a court order to treat you with respect." I shifted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "Family are the people who stay because they love you, not because you paid for their silence." "Stephanie, please," he sobbed. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said. I turned my back on him. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking on the floor, passing the gallery, passing the reporters, passing the bailiff who gave me a respectful nod. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the hallway. I did not look back. I did not wait for an apology. I knew he did not have one to give. He was only sorry he had lost. The world outside the courthouse seemed brighter. The sun was shining on the pavement, drying the puddles from the rain the night before. By the time I got back to my office, the narrative had already shifted. I opened my laptop to check the news. The Harbor City Gazette, the same paper that had run Veronica's sob story a week ago, had published a breaking update. "Justice served. Evidence reveals decades of elder financial abuse in Wallace estate case." The article was a scathing indictment of Veronica and Daniel. It detailed the forensic accounting. It detailed the forgery. It painted Grandpa Edward not as a senile victim, but as a sharp-witted man who had paid a ransom for 20 years just to keep his daughter in his life, only to be betrayed in the end. Ms. Stephanie Delgado, an assistant district attorney, successfully defended her grandfather's legacy using a meticulous archive of evidence compiled by the deceased himself. The article read, "I walked to the break room to get coffee. The conversation stopped when I entered, but this time, the silence was not awkward. It was respectful. Marcus, the junior associate who had asked for gossip a week ago, nodded at me. "Good job, Steph," he said seriously. That was impressive work." I nodded back. "Thanks, Marcus." I was no longer the girl with the crazy stepmother drama. I was the prosecutor who had dismantled a fraud ring from the inside out. I had reclaimed my name. That evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, I drove to Riverview Cemetery. It was quiet. The wind rustled through the oak trees. I walked to the family plot. The grass where Veronica had stomped on my journal had been raked clean by Mr. Alvarez. The mud was gone. I knelt down between the two headstones. I placed a dozen white roses on Grandma Helen's side. On Grandpa Edward's side, I placed something else. It was a brand new journal, black leather, crisp, white pages, unbroken spine. I rested my hand on the cold granite of his headstone. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "You were right. The ink lasted longer than the lies." I sat there for a long time, watching the light fade. I thought about the anger that had fueled me for so long. It was a heavy fuel. It burned hot, but it left soot on everything. Now that the fire was out, I felt light. I felt empty, but in a good way, like a room that had been cleared of clutter and was waiting to be furnished. "I am done writing about them," I told him. "This book, this one is for me. No more records of money stolen, no more records of insults, just my life." I stood up, leaving the roses, but taking the new journal with me. I was not going to leave it there. It belonged in the world of the living. When I got back to my apartment, the silence was welcoming. I made a cup of tea and sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. I clicked on the folder one last time. True record of S.D. I intended to move it to an external hard drive and put it in a safe to close the chapter for good. But as I scrolled through the files, checking to make sure everything was there, I saw a file type I did not recognize. It was at the very bottom of the list. Backup forward, move. I frowned. I had never seen a video file in the archive before. Grandpa had mostly scanned documents and recorded audio. I clicked on it. The media player opened. The screen was black for a second, and then, suddenly, there he was. Grandpa Edward filled the frame. He was sitting in his study, wearing his favorite cardigan. He looked younger than he had in his final days. The timestamp showed the video was recorded 3 years ago. He leaned into the camera, squinting a little, adjusting the angle. "Is this thing on?" he muttered to himself. "Ah, yes, red light. Good." He sat back, cleared his throat, and looked directly into the lens. It felt like he was looking right at me across the barrier of time and death. "Hello, Steffi," he said, smiling that warm, mischievous smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "If you are watching this, it means 2 things. 1, I am dead. Sorry about that. I hope it was peaceful and I did not drool too much. And 2, it means the system worked. It means you accessed the archive, and you probably had to use it." He picked up his pipe, fiddled with it, and set it down. "I know you, kiddo. I know you are probably sitting there right now, thinking that this archive was about saving you. You are thinking that I spent all these hours scanning your journals just to make sure you got the inheritance." He shook his head. "But you are wrong. The money is just money. You can make money. You are smart." He leaned forward again, his face serious. "I made these copies because I wanted you to know that your story mattered when you are a child, and the people who are supposed to love you treat you like a burden. You start to think that maybe you are the problem. You start to think that maybe your version of reality is wrong." I felt tears pricking my eyes. He was speaking to the deepest, darkest fear I had carried my whole life. "I wanted you to have proof," he continued. "Proof that you were right. Proof that you were good. Proof that you were loved." He paused, looking down at his hands. "But there is one more thing. I did not just send these files to the cloud. I sent a redacted version of our story, names changed, of course, to a friend of mine. He runs a non-profit organization in Chicago that helps victims of familial financial abuse." My eyes widened. "I gave them the blueprint. Steffi," he said, grinning. "I gave them the methodology, the scanning, the cross-referencing, the timestamps. They are calling it the Wallace Protocol. They are going to use it to teach other kids, other grandparents, other vulnerable people how to document their lives before it is too late. He chuckled. So, while you were fighting your war in Harbor City, you were also helping a 19-year-old in Ohio keep her college fund. You were helping an old man in Florida keep his house. He pointed at the camera. You thought copies of just meant paper copies, but it means copies of the truth, and the truth spreads. It protects people we will never even meet. He sat back, looking satisfied. Okay, that is enough from me. Go live your life. Stephanie, write a book that does not have any villains in it. You deserve a boring chapter. He waved. The screen went black. I sat there in the darkness of my apartment, the tears flowing freely down my face. I was laughing and crying at the same time. I had thought this was just a revenge story. I thought it was about getting even. I thought it was about winning a court case and humiliating a wicked stepmother. But Grandpa Edward had been playing a much bigger game. He hadn't just given me a shield. He had built a lighthouse. He had turned our pain, our secret struggle in that cold house, into a tool that could save strangers. The title of my life wasn't The Girl Who Was Robbed. It was The Girl Who Kept the Record. I wiped my face. I reached for the new, black journal I had bought. I opened it to the first crisp, white page. I picked up my pen. For the first time in 20 years, I did not feel the need to document a slight. I did not feel the need to record a debt. I wrote the date, and then I wrote, "Today, I write not to fight against anyone, but to remember that he believed in me. I write to remember that the truth, if you hold it gently and keep it safe, will always find its way to the right place. The war is over, the record is closed, and for the first time, the page is blank, and the pen is entirely mine." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Stephanie and her grandfather's master plan. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I would love to know how far this story has traveled. And if you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share these moments of justice with even more people. See you in the next story.